So, you died. My condolences. Happens to the best of us, and, well, the rest of us too. Now for the truly terrifying question, what's next? If your only reference points are a few cartoons, and that one time you skimmed Dante in high school, you probably have a pretty clear picture of the afterlife. You're picturing fire, maybe some pitchforks, a gentleman in a red suit with questionable facial hair. It's all very organized, very corporate, very eternal damnation. Well, I'm here to tell you to forget all of that. Because before hell got its modern PR team, there was the original Afterlife franchise, the Greek Underworld. And let me tell you, it was a mess. It was less a coherent vision of what comes after, and more of a sprawling, ever-changing, deeply confusing cosmic bureaucracy run by a guy who really didn't want the job in the first place. This wasn't a simple binary of heaven and hell. Oh no, that would be far too easy. This was a place born from humanity's deepest, most primal fears, and it evolved over 1,000 years from a vague, gloomy basement apartment into a complex subterranean kingdom with its own set of rules, its own VIPs, and a justice system that makes very little sense when you stop to think about it. Today, we're going to take a journey down the river Styx, but we're leaving the ferryman's fee at home. We're going to trace the complete chronological history of this bizarre and fascinating place. We'll look at how it started, how it was built, and how it became a canvas for the Greeks to paint their greatest anxieties and their most profound philosophies. So grab your existential dread and a sense of humor, because welcome to the after-party at the end of the world. Spoiler alert, you were never invited. Alright, let's have a little chat about death. It's a fun, light-hearted topic, perfect for any occasion. Specifically, let's talk about the original big-name afterlife, the one that's been copied, remixed, and misunderstood more times than most myths can count. The Greek Underworld. When I say Greek Underworld, what pops into your head? Go on, be honest. For most of you, it's probably a fiery, cavernous kingdom filled with wailing souls, ruled by a fast-talking, blue-flame-haired CEO of suffering named Hades. You're picturing a cosmic bouncer with a bad temper, maybe a pair of bumbling imp sidekicks, and a general vibe of eternal damnation with a gothic aesthetic. Well, I'm here to tell you, with all the love in my cynical heart, that you should take that image, ball it up, and toss it into the nearest mythical river of fire. Because that version, the one cemented in our minds by decades of brilliant animation, epic video games, and Hollywood's allergy to nuance, is about as historically accurate as a caveman riding a dinosaur. It's the fast food version of a 1,000-year-old mythological banquet. The truth is infinitely weirder, messier, and frankly, far more fascinating. The Greek underworld wasn't some static, monolithic hell. It didn't just spring into existence fully formed with a three-headed dog and a now hiring sign for eternal torment. It was a concept in constant beta testing, an evolving idea that was argued over, reimagined, and tweaked for centuries by poets, philosophers, and everyday people trying to answer the one question that keeps us all up at night. What happens next? Think of it less like a single, finished painting and more like a very old, very important canvas that's been painted over again and again by a dozen different artists, each with their own agenda. The first artist, some guy named Homer, just slapped on a few coats of depressing monochromatic grey. It was less a place of punishment and more a place of profound cosmic boredom. Then another artist came along and decided it needed a bit more structure, a bit more management. So Hades gets promoted from a vague, shadowy figure to the reluctant landlord of the dead. He doesn't particularly want the job, mind you. He drew the short straw. So the underworld becomes less a kingdom and more a sprawling, dimly lit and inescapable corporate office, with Hades as the perpetually unimpressed CEO who just wants everyone to file their paperwork correctly and stop trying to escape. But it didn't stop there. Later artists came in and started adding new wings to the complex. They decided that maybe not everyone deserved the same drab, eternal waiting room. So they dug a sub-basement of horrors called Tartarus for the truly naughty, a place for divine justice to get really, really creative with its punishments. And for the VIPs, the certified heroes and all-around good guys, they built a gated community on the edge of the property called Elysium. It was the first ever exclusive afterlife club, complete with good weather and, one assumes, slightly better spectral catering. And the geography, forget a simple map. Navigating the netherworld was a bureaucratic nightmare of rivers. There wasn't just one. There was the Styx, the river of unbreakable oaths that even the gods feared. There was Acheron, the river of woe Lethe, the river of forgetfulness where you lost all memory of your past life, and Phlegethon, a literal river of fire. Getting anywhere required a ferryman with a serious attitude problem, the right form of payment, and the patience of a saint, or in this case, a sinner. This place was staffed too. It wasn't just Hades sitting on a throne of bones looking menacing. You had a whole crew of beings keeping the end of the line running. There was Charon, the aforementioned grumpy ferryman, basically the universe's most miserable cab driver, who would leave you stranded for eternity if you couldn't cough up a single coin. Then there was Cerberus, the famous three-headed guard dog, who was apparently less of a terrifying monster and more of a very good boy who just needed a little pat on each of his heads to let you pass. As long as you were heading in, not out. And we can't forget the queen of it all, Persephone. She wasn't just some damsel in distress, she was the co-ruler of this whole operation, splitting her time between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. She was the unwilling intern who, through a combination of corporate maneuvering and a legally binding pomegranate contract, ended up as a part owner of the entire franchise. Her story alone tells you everything you need to know about how the Greeks viewed the connection between life, death, and the changing of the seasons. Then you have the sheer audacity of the mortals who decided to visit. This wasn't a place you were supposed to go for a weekend getaway. It was a one-way trip. Yet, a surprising number of heroes treated the underworld like a tourist destination they needed to check off their bucket list. Heracles went down there to basically dognap Cerberus as part of a court-ordered labor sentence. Odysseus popped in for a quick chat with the dead to get some directions, treating it like a supernatural information booth. And then there's Orpheus, the rock star who thought he could charm his way past death itself with a sad song on his lyre. He waltzed in, made the god of the dead weep, and nearly pulled off the greatest jailbreak in mythological history, only to fail because of one simple, infuriatingly human mistake. These weren't just stories of bravery, they were explorations of grief, love, and the absolute limits of mortal arrogance. They tell us that the Greeks saw the border between life and death as firm, but not entirely impermeable. With enough guts, or perhaps enough foolishness, you could buy a round-trip ticket. And the punishments, oh, the glorious, absurdly specific punishments. This is where the Greek imagination really shines. They didn't just do fire and brimstone, their vision of eternal justice had a dark, ironic sense of humor. You get Sisyphus, the guy who cheated death, forced to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down the moment he reaches the top. The punishment isn't the effort, it's the futility. It's the universe's way of saying, you think you're clever, how's this for a meaningless task? Then there's Tantalus, a king who did the unthinkable and tried to serve the gods a dish made from his own son. His punishment? To stand in a pool of water he can never drink, under a fruit tree he can never reach, forever tantalized by the very things that would save him. It's a level of poetic, psychological torment that's so much more chilling than just being set on fire. It shows a deep understanding of human desire and despair. The underworld wasn't just a prison, it was a curriculum of consequences, a masterclass in divine retribution. But just when you think you have a handle on it, the philosophers show up and flip the whole board over. Thinkers like Plato and the various mystery cults started to look at the underworld and say, what if it's not a real place? What if it's a metaphor? They began to internalize it, turning the journey through the rivers and regions into a symbolic journey of the soul. It became a philosophical concept, a moral landscape representing the trials and purification of the human spirit. The underworld entered its conceptual art phase, becoming less about geography and more about psychology. So, what's the point of digging all this up? Why does this ancient, convoluted vision of the afterlife still matter? Because its bones form the skeleton of almost every Western concept of life after death that followed. Its ideas of judgment, of punishment tailored to the sin, of a paradise for the worthy, of a shadowy realm for the forgotten, have echoed through Roman mythology, trickled into early Christian theology, and now sit permanently in the DNA of our books, our movies, and our video games. A good, gloomy afterlife, it turns out, is a timeless concept. Over the course of this video, we're going to be your spectral tour guides. We'll ditch the pop culture map and navigate the underworld as the Greeks saw it, in all its complex, contradictory, and evolving glory. We're going to trace its history from a hazy, boring ghostland to a highly organized system of divine justice and, finally, to a profound philosophical symbol. We'll meet the staff, from the perpetually annoyed ferryman to the surprisingly fluffy hellhound. We'll revisit the audacious tourists who made a house call to the land of the dead, and we'll examine the hilariously specific punishments to understand what they reveal about the Greek sense of morality and their dark, ironic wit. It's a story about more than just death. It's about how we, as humans, have always used the idea of an ending to try and make sense of the middle. It's a journey into our enduring fascination with what lies beyond the final curtain, a fascination driven less by fear and more by a deep, morbid curiosity. So grab your single coin for the ferryman, try not to make eye contact with any of the judges, and for the love of all that is unholy, do not eat the pomegranate. So, before the underworld became this highly organized, multi-level corporation of eternal consequences, what was it? If you rewind the tape past the point where Hades became the reluctant CEO, you land in a much older, much murkier version of the afterlife. This is the original model, the beta test, and frankly, it sounds dreadful. This is the afterlife, as envisioned by poets like Homer, long before philosophers and playwrights started adding their own interior decorating and moral floor plans. Forget a fiery hell for the wicked and a paradise for the righteous. The Homeric underworld was startlingly, depressingly democratic. Everyone went to the same place. And that place wasn't so much a kingdom as it was a cosmic waiting room with bad lighting. It was a dim, shadowy, subterranean realm, sometimes called the House of Hades, even before Hades was a fully fleshed out character. Other times, it was described as being at the literal edge of the known world, past the great river Oceanus that was believed to encircle the flat Earth. You didn't so much die and go to a specific place, as you just ended up in the gloom. Our best travel guide to this dreary destination comes from Homer's Odyssey, specifically in the part known as the Nekyia, or the Book of the Dead. Our hero Odysseus, ever the overachiever, doesn't actually die. Instead, he sails his boat to the world's end, digs a pit, and performs a ritual involving honey, milk, wine, water, and the blood of a sacrificed ram and ewe. It's basically the ancient equivalent of a supernatural flair, designed to attract the attention of the locals. And who are the locals? They're the Upsyche, the shades of the dead. Now, it's crucial to understand that these aren't ghosts in the way we think of them. They aren't rattling chains or haunting their old homes. A shade is more like a faint, powerless echo of a person. They have no omenos, no strength, no wit, no real consciousness. They are, for all intents and purposes, running on autopilot. So Homer describes them as flitting about like bats, squeaking and gibbering without sense or memory. They are so disconnected from their former lives that they don't even recognize Odysseus, their own family member or friend, until they perform one very specific, very grim action, drinking the blood of the sacrificed animals he brought with him. It's this dark cocktail that temporarily restores their memory and their ability to communicate. Think of it as a ghostly shot of espresso, allowing for a brief, horrifying moment of clarity before they fade back into the fog. The first soul Odysseus speaks to isn't a great king or a mighty warrior. It's his own crewman, Elpenor. Poor Elpenor didn't die in a glorious battle. He got drunk, fell off a roof, and broke his neck. His presence here is a stark reminder of the rules of this early afterlife. It doesn't matter how you died or who you were. Everyone punches the same clock and ends up in the same misty, miserable break room. Elpenor's main concern isn't his eternal state. It's that his body back on Earth hasn't been buried properly. He begs Odysseus to go back and give him funeral rites, so he doesn't become a creature, curse from the gods upon him. This tells us that, for the early Greeks, the focus was intensely on the world of the living. The proper rituals and remembrance by those still alive were more important than the actual experience of being dead, because being dead was, fundamentally, nothing. Next, Odysseus has to speak with the prophet Tiresias, the whole reason for his creepy field trip. Tiresias is a special case. He was granted the ability to retain his mind in death by Persephone, but even he needs a drink of the blood to prophesy for Odysseus. He's the exception that proves the miserable rule. Without divine intervention, your mind is wiped. He gives his prophecy and then wanders off, leaving Odysseus to deal with a far more heartbreaking encounter. He sees his own mother, Anticlea. At first, she just drifts past him, a vacant shell, completely unaware of her son's presence right in front of her. It's only after she, too, drinks from the pit of blood that the light of recognition sparks in her eyes. It's a deeply tragic moment. She tells Odysseus that she died of a broken heart, from sheer grief and worry over his long absence after the Trojan War. Her description of the afterlife is utterly bleak. She confirms that this is the state for all mortals. Once the fire of life consumes the body, the psyche flits away like a dream. She can't even embrace her son when Odysseus tries to hug her 3 times. His arms pass right through her insubstantial form. It's a gut punch of a scene that establishes the horror of this place, not through punishment, but through profound, irreversible loss. The loss of self, of connection, of touch. Then the VIPs start showing up for their temporary blood-induced therapy session. Agamemnon, the great king who led the Greeks at Troy, appears, and he is still furious. He tells the story of his murder at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. A bloody tale of betrayal he recounts with all the raw anger of a man who was just stabbed yesterday. Yet, for all his rage, he's powerless. He's just a shade, venting his eternal frustration before fading back into the gloom. He warns Odysseus to be wary of his own wife, Penelope, a bit of cynical advice from beyond the grave. But the most devastating testimony, the one that truly encapsulates the sheer misery of the Homeric afterlife, comes from the greatest warrior of them all, Achilles. Odysseus, trying to be encouraging, congratulates Achilles, saying that in life he was honored like a god, and now, down here, he must surely rule among the dead. He's essentially saying, hey, chin up. At least you're the king of this gloomy dump. Achilles' response is perhaps one of the most famous and soul-crushing lines in all of Western literature. He immediately shuts Odysseus down. "Do not speak to me soothingly about death, glorious Odysseus," he says. "I would rather be a slave on earth for another man, some poor, landless tenant who struggles to make a living, than be king over all these dead who have perished." Let that sink in. This is Achilles, the man who knowingly chose a short, glorious life over a long, boring one. He picked fame and an early death, the ultimate heroic sacrifice. And now, from the other side, he's telling us it was a terrible deal. He would rather be the lowliest, most miserable living person than the most powerful dead one. His statement is a complete and utter repudiation of the heroic code he lived by. It confirms that this afterlife isn't a reward, or a punishment, or anything really. It's simply the end of everything that matters. The encounters continue. Odysseus sees Ajax, who still holds a grudge over losing a contest for Achilles' armor and refuses to speak, turning his back even in death. It's a moment of profound, pathetic silence. He also gets a glimpse of what will later be developed into Tartarus, the place of eternal punishment. But here, it's not a separate region, it's just part of the landscape. He sees the giant Tityos, his body stretched out over 9 acres while 2 vultures perpetually eat his liver, a punishment for assaulting the goddess Leto. He sees Tantalus, forever standing in a pool of water he can't drink, under fruit trees he can't reach, for the crime of serving the gods his own son for dinner. And of course he sees Sisyphus, endlessly pushing his boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down, for being a trickster who thought he could outsmart the gods and cheat death. But these figures are the outliers. They aren't being punished for being bad people in a human moral sense. They are being punished for specific, egregious transgressions against the gods themselves. They attacked a goddess, betrayed the gods' trust, or defied the divine order. For the average person, from the lowly soldier to the mighty king, there was no judgment, there was no weighing of souls, no sorting of the good from the bad. You just were. A faded copy in a faded world. So, this was the original afterlife, a vast, undifferentiated and profoundly boring expanse of misty gloom. It's a realm defined not by what it is, but by what it isn't. It isn't life, it isn't consciousness, it isn't memory. It is, at its core, an eternity of nothingness. And honestly, it's easy to see why this concept couldn't last. It's just too bleak, too simple, and too unsatisfying. There's no justice, no reward, no narrative. It was a blank, grey canvas just waiting for someone to come along and paint a masterpiece of divine bureaucracy and eternal consequences. It needed a landlord, a manager, a CEO to give the place some structure. And that is exactly where Hades comes in. So, you've got a brand new cosmos. The old management, a bunch of chaotic, oversized tyrants called the Titans, have been forcibly retired after a decade-long corporate war that made galactic history. Now, the new leadership has to carve up the territory. At the head of the table are the three brothers who led the hostile takeover, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. This is the moment, the ultimate cosmic real estate negotiation, and like any high-stakes family business meeting, it's about to get awkward for at least one of them. They decide to leave it to chance, which feels both incredibly fair and deeply, deeply irresponsible when you're dividing up the literal fabric of existence. So they draw lots. Zeus, the ambitious, thunder-wielding golden boy, draws the long straw. He gets the sky, the heavens, the top-floor corner office with a view of everything. He's the new CEO of the cosmos, the chairman of the board, the guy whose face is on all the marketing materials. Good for him. Then Poseidon steps up. He draws the second lot. He gets the seas, all of them. Rivers, oceans, lakes. That's a pretty sweet deal. He's in charge of all the world's shipping routes, its hidden treasures, its beachfront properties, and its terrifying, tentacled monsters. He's the head of the global logistics and exotic assets division. A powerful, respectable, and frankly, pretty cool gig. He can spend his days surfing and occasionally terrorizing sailors. Not bad at all. And then there's Hades, the eldest brother, the one who, by some accounts, fought just as hard, if not harder, than the others. He steps up to the cosmic hat, reaches in, and pulls out the shortest, saddest little stick you've ever seen. His prize? The Underworld, the dark, damp, sunless basement of reality, no windows, no natural light, and the only residents are the wispy, unhappy souls of the dead. He hasn't just been given a new job, he's been handed a permanent, eternal demotion to a department nobody even wants to think about. This isn't a kingdom, it's a cosmic consolation prize. It's the ancient Greek equivalent of being put in charge of data entry for the entire universe forever. And this is where we have to pause and do a bit of PR cleanup for Hades, because thousands of years of pop culture have done him dirty. When you hear the name Hades, you probably picture a fiery, cackling devil with horns scheming to overthrow his goody-two-shoes brother Zeus and bring about an age of darkness. But that's not Hades. Not even close. You're thinking of a completely different mythology's bad guy. The Greeks didn't have a singular figure of ultimate evil like Satan. They had chaos, and they had gods who could be petty, cruel, and vindictive looking at you, Zeus. But the concept of a lord of evil just wasn't in their playbook. Hades wasn't the god of evil, he was the god of the dead. And that's a very, very different job description. Think of it this way. Hades isn't the one who kills you. That job belongs to Thanatos, the actual god of death, a far more minor figure who was seen as the gentle hand that guided you from one state to the next. Hades is what comes after. He's not the executioner, he's the warden. He's the eternally sighing bureaucrat who has to process the paperwork for every single soul that shuffles off the mortal coil. His job isn't to cause death, but to manage it. And honestly, he seems to resent it from the very beginning. He didn't choose this life, or rather, this afterlife. It was thrust upon him, and he approaches it with the grim, dutiful resignation of someone who knows they're stuck in a dead-end job for eternity. His very name tells you a lot about his role. Hades likely means the unseen, or the unseen one. It's a name that speaks not of evil, but of remoteness and mystery. He is, by definition, separate from the world of the living, the light, and the loud, dramatic squabbles of his relatives on Mount Olympus. He's so deeply associated with his gloomy realm that the place eventually just takes his name. It's like if your office was so depressing, it was just called Gary's place. The Greeks were so unnerved by him and his domain that they often avoided saying his name altogether, for fear of attracting his attention. You don't just casually name-drop the CEO of the afterlife. It's bad for your health. Instead, they used euphemisms, clever little nicknames to talk around him. His most famous one was Plauton, which means the rich one or the wealthy. This wasn't because he was throwing lavish parties, quite the opposite. It was a reference to the fact that all the mineral wealth of the world, the gold, the silver, the precious gems, was buried deep within the earth, technically in his domain. So, while Zeus had the glory and Poseidon had the oceans, Hades was, in a very literal sense, unimaginably rich. But what's the point of being the wealthiest god in the pantheon when your entire kingdom is a monochromatic bummer and you have no one to spend it on? It's the ultimate cosmic irony. He owns all the treasures of the earth, but lives in its darkest corner. So, with Hades reluctantly taking the throne, the underworld begins to change. It starts to solidify from that vague, murky, Homeric concept of a gloomy, generic waiting room into a structured, organized, and dare I say, corporatized realm. Hades is the first CEO the afterlife has ever had, and he runs it with an iron fist and a mountain of spectral paperwork. Under his management, the underworld gets departments, it gets geography, and most importantly, it gets rules. One rule, in particular, stands above all others. What comes in does not go out. The doors only swing one way. He is obsessively, jealously possessive of his subjects, the shades of the dead. He doesn't torment them, for the most part. He just files them. Every soul is an asset, a number in his grand, infinite ledger, and he will not tolerate anyone trying to steal from his collection or falsify the numbers. His defining characteristic isn't malice, it's a rigid, unyielding, and almost pathological adherence to the rules. He is the ultimate stickler for company policy. His palace, the House of Hades, isn't described as a fiery pit of torture. It's a vast, silent, and imposing fortress located somewhere in the depths of a gloomy region known as Erebus. It's surrounded by gates, guarded by his multi-headed dog Cerberus, and set within bleak, flowerless fields of asphodel. If Olympus is a glittering, marble-columned luxury resort, the House of Hades is a brutalist, soul-crushingly enormous government building. You can just imagine the interior design, dark, cold, and utterly devoid of personality. The throne room is probably cavernous and echoing, designed to make any visitor feel small and insignificant. This isn't a home, it's the head office of the dead, the central processing unit for every soul in existence. And from his onyx throne, Hades presides over his silent, sprawling kingdom with a kind of detached, managerial gloom. He rarely, if ever, leaves his kingdom. Why would he? A visit to the sunlit world of the living would only remind him of what he's missing. A trip up to Olympus would mean dealing with his insufferable, cheating, glory hog of a brother, Zeus. So he stays put, a lonely monarch in a silent kingdom. The myths that do involve him directly almost always revolve around someone trying to break his one big rule. When the hero Pirithous foolishly tries to kidnap Hades' future wife, Hades doesn't fly into a rage. He offers them a seat, literally. He invites them to sit on the end of a chair of forgetfulness, which promptly binds them there for eternity. It's not a dramatic, fiery punishment. It's a cold, calculated, and bureaucratic one. It's the mythological equivalent of having your security pass permanently revoked and being locked in a meeting room forever. Efficient, quiet, and utterly final. And then comes the biggest shake-up his administration has ever seen, the single most dramatic event in the underworld's corporate history, the arrival of a queen. But Hades, the lonely, isolated king, decides he needs a partner, and in typical Greek god fashion, he doesn't go about this through dating or polite conversation. He commits an act of divine abduction, snatching the goddess Persephone, daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, while she's picking flowers. We'll get into the gritty details of their relationship later, but for now, let's just focus on what this means for Hades and his realm. This isn't just a marriage, it's a hostile merger. He has, for the first time, brought a piece of the living, breathing, sunlit world into his perfectly ordered, monochromatic basement. Persephone is the embodiment of spring, of new life, of everything his kingdom is not. Her arrival is a cataclysmic event. It introduces a new variable into his carefully balanced equation of death and stillness. It's like a perpetually grey office suddenly having a window smashed open, letting in a blast of sunlight, colour, and fresh air. For Hades, it's probably both terrifying and intoxicating. His housewarming is finally complete, but the new roommate is about to change everything. She becomes his co-ruler, the one other being with any real authority in the land of the dead. She complicates his simple, rigid existence, bridging the gap between his unseen realm and the world of the living. The underworld is no longer just Hades' gloomy office. It's a shared space, a kingdom with two monarchs who represent the fundamental duality of life and death itself. He may have gotten the rawest of deals in that cosmic lottery, but in setting up his house, Hades didn't just create a place for the dead. He forged a realm so powerful, so resonant, and so terrifyingly organized that it would haunt the human imagination for millennia to come. He may have been a reluctant CEO, but he built an empire that would never, ever crumble. An empire of silence, shadows, and perfect, inescapable order. The ultimate testament to making the absolute best of the absolute worst job in the cosmos. Alright, so you've shuffled off this mortal coil. Condolences, or congratulations? It's complicated. Your final journey has begun, but before you get to your eternal timeshare, you have to navigate the landscape. And let me tell you, the Greek Underworld's infrastructure makes the worst airport you've ever been to look like a marvel of efficiency and clear signage. Forget GPS, you'll be lucky to get a coherent grunt from a local. The entire realm is essentially a divine bureaucracy's attempt at urban planning, and it shows. It's a sprawling, gloomy territory defined by its natural, or rather, supernatural barriers. 5 very distinct, very symbolic rivers that you absolutely have to cross. There's no bridge, no bypass, no convenient ferry schedule. Each one is a checkpoint on your soul's final, miserable road trip. First up, you hit the Acheron, the River of Woe. A fitting name, because it's here you get your first taste of underworld logistics. This is the main waterway, the grand murky canal where you'll find the infamous ferryman, Charon, waiting to take you across. The air is thick with the moans of the unburied, ghosts who can't pay the fare and are doomed to wander the banks for 100 years. It's less a river and more a supernatural purgatory's waiting room. Now, Charon. He's the first employee you'll meet, and he sets the tone for the service you can expect. He's old, he's grumpy, and he has a strict no coin, no ride policy. This is why ancient Greeks were so insistent on placing a coin, an obol, in the mouth of the dead. It wasn't a charming tradition, it was a non-negotiable ticket. Forget your coin, and you're stuck listening to the woeful sounds of the Acheron for a century. Talk about a layover. Once you've paid the grump and crossed the River of Woe, you might think the worst is over. Oh, you sweet, naive, recently deceased soul. You're just getting started. The next major landmark in this terrible place is the Styx, and this one is the real deal, the River of Hate. It's so powerful, so fundamentally dreadful, that even the gods themselves swear their most unbreakable oaths upon its waters. Think about that for a second. Zeus, a deity whose entire personal history is a testament to broken promises and infidelity, wouldn't dare violate a vow made on the Styx. When a god wanted to make a pinky promise they absolutely had to keep, they swore on this river. It's the ultimate cosmic contract, and its waters are the ink. This tells you all you need to know about the Styx. It's not just a boundary, it's a fundamental law of the universe. It's hate, liquefied and flowing in a circle around the entire joint. But wait, there's more. Your tour of depressing waterways continues with the Lethe, the River of Forgetfulness. This one flows through the fields of Elysium, and its purpose is a bit more philosophical. One sip of its waters, and your entire mortal life is wiped clean from your consciousness. Every triumph, every failure, every love, every loss gone. It's the universe's most potent Hiddelite browser history button. For souls destined for reincarnation, a drink from the Lethe was mandatory. You can't start a new life weighed down by the baggage of the old one, after all. But it's a strangely tragic concept, isn't it? To achieve peace or a new beginning, you have to erase the very person you were. It's a clean slate, but at the cost of your own story. A blessing and a curse served at room temperature. If you're a fan of things being on fire, you'll love the next river. The Phlegathon, the River of Fire. This isn't a metaphor, it's a literal, flowing river of flame that coils deep into the underworld. It's not for boating, and it's definitely not for swimming. The Phlegathon serves as a sort of fiery moat, a security perimeter for the realm's most notorious section, Tartarus. Its flames provide the only light in the deepest darkness, a flickering, eternal reminder that you're in a very, very bad place. And finally, providing the ambient soundtrack for your eternal despair, we have the Cocytus, the River of Wailing. This tributary of the Styx is fed by the tears of the damned, a river of pure, unadulterated lamentation. Its banks are a frozen, muddy wasteland where those guilty of patricide were said to wander. It's the ultimate expression of grief, a geographical feature made of sorrow. So, to recap the story, you've navigated woe, hate, forgetfulness, fire, and wailing, and you haven't even gotten to your final destination yet. The travel guide gives this part of the journey 0 stars. After surviving the world's worst water park, you finally arrive at the main gates of Hades' realm. And who's there to greet you? Cerberus, the infamous three-headed hound of hell. He's often depicted as a slavering, terrifying monster, which, to be fair, he is. But his job is less about being scary and more about being an extremely effective bouncer. He's famously friendly and welcoming to new arrivals, a deceptive bit of customer service. The catch: he's not friendly at all if you try to leave. Cerberus's whole purpose is to keep the dead in and the living out. He's the ultimate guard dog, a fluffy, three-headed, serpent-tailed guardian who ensures that the population of the underworld remains stable. He's a good boy, just a very, very firm one, with a zero-tolerance policy for escape attempts. Once you get past the welcoming committee, it's time for your final judgment. Your soul is brought before a tribunal of 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These were once mortal kings, famed for their wisdom and justice, and they were given the eternal promotion to the afterlife's HR department. They review your entire life, every deed and misdeed, and decide your ultimate fate. There are no lawyers, no appeals. It's the universe's most stressful performance review. Based on their verdict, you're sent to one of 3 main regions. For the vast, overwhelming majority of people, they're neither truly good nor truly evil, the existentially beige, the destination is the Asphodel Meadows. Don't let the name fool you, this is not a picturesque field of flowers. It's a grey, shadowy, and profoundly boring place. Imagine an endless, misty plain covered in bland, greyish flowers, where you just wander. You exist as a shade, a flittering ghost, with no real memory, no passion, no purpose, you just are. It's the afterlife equivalent of a cosmic waiting room, a state of perpetual, flavourless mediocrity. It's not punishment, it's just nothing. And for many Greeks, that was a truly terrifying prospect. The loss of self, of passion, of identity. But what if you were one of the lucky few? What if you were a hero, a demigod, or just one of those rare, genuinely righteous people? Well, congratulations, you've won a ticket to Elysium, also known as the Elysian Fields. This is the Underworld's VIP section, its all-inclusive 5-star resort. It's a paradise of eternal sunshine, gentle breezes, and endless leisure. Here, souls get to spend eternity engaging in whatever brought them joy in life. Feasting, music, athletics, writing poetry, it's a perpetual golden hour retirement party. But let's be cynical for a moment, admission was tricky. It wasn't just about being good, it was often about being related to the gods, or being a legendary warrior. It was the ultimate celestial country club, and membership was incredibly, frustratingly exclusive. In some later traditions, a more poignant, specific neighborhood was added to the map: the Fields of Mourning. This wasn't for the wicked or the heroic, but for a very specific type of tragic figure, those who had died for love. Here, souls like Phaedra and Dido wandered in a hazy, myrtle grove, forever lost in the sorrow that defined the end of their lives. It's a surprisingly empathetic addition to the geography, a quiet, sad corner of the afterlife reserved for the broken-hearted. It acknowledges that some wounds are so deep, they follow you beyond the grave. And then, there's the basement. The dark, terrifying, maximum security prison at the bottom of everything, Tartarus. This isn't just another region, it's a place as far beneath the earth as the heavens are above it. It's a primordial pit of darkness, chaos, and despair, surrounded by a bronze wall and the fiery river Phlegethon. This is where the real enemies of the gods were sent. Before it was a prison for humans, Tartarus was the holding cell for the Titans, the generation of deities that Zeus and the Olympians overthrew. It's the divine equivalent of Alcatraz, a place of absolute containment for threats to the cosmic order. Later, it became the destination for mortals who committed the most heinous crimes imaginable, the truly, irredeemably wicked. These souls weren't just left to wander, they were given specific, eternal, and often ironic punishments, but that's a story for another time. So, there you have it. The geography of the Greek Underworld, a realm defined by its 5 miserable rivers, guarded by a 3-headed dog, and divided into regions for the mediocre, the magnificent, the heartbroken, and the monstrously evil. It's a complex, terrifying, and let's be honest, terribly organized place. Navigating it is a one-way trip with no map, a grumpy ferryman, and a judgment at the end that will define your eternity. Welcome home. So, we've established that the Greek underworld is less of a fiery hellscape and more of a vast, gloomy, and endlessly bureaucratic dimension. And like any massive, soul-crushing organization, it can't run itself. It needs staff. It needs a dedicated, or at least eternally bound, team of functionaries to manage the ceaseless influx of the dead. These aren't exactly the folks you'd see at a company retreat, but they are the unsung cogs in the great, grey machine of the afterlife. From the frontline workers to the surprisingly powerful management, the underworld is staffed by a cast of characters who are just as fascinating, and frankly, just as miserable as the souls they process. They are the celestial civil servants, the divine DMV clerks, the supernatural security guards running a tight, if slightly leaky, ship at the end of the world. Our tour of the underworld's HR department begins, as it must, at the water's edge with the resident ferryman, Sharon. If the underworld is a miserable corporation, Sharon is its most tenured and most famously disgruntled employee. He's the first face, or more accurately, the first grim scowl that greets the newly departed, and he sets the tone for the entire afterlife experience, which is to say, bleak and transactional. Picture him. A squalid, grim figure with a fiery gaze and a tangled, unkempt beard, perpetually clad in greasy rags. He's the cosmic embodiment of the surly taxi driver who's been circling the same block for 3,000 years. He has seen it all, heard every sob story, and remains utterly, profoundly unimpressed. His job is simple and conscious to ferry the souls of the dead across the river Styx, or sometimes the Acheron, depending on which ancient travel guide you're reading. It's a crucial role, the first official step in leaving the world of the living behind for good. But Charon doesn't work for free, and he certainly doesn't work for sentiment. His is a strictly cash-up-front business. The required fare was a single obol, a small coin that the ancient Greeks would dutifully place in the mouth of their deceased loved ones before burial. It was the ultimate final transaction, the toll paid to cross over. No coin, no ride. It's a policy as inflexible as death itself. This wasn't a suggestion, it was the unbendable rule of the realm. So, what happened to the poor souls who died without the fare, or whose families forgot to tip the deceased? They were left to wander the banks of the Styx for 100 years, a ghostly crowd of the unferried, waiting in the longest, most depressing queue imaginable. It's a haunting image of being stuck in limbo, unable to move forward or go back, all for the lack of a single coin. Charon, for his part, would simply ignore their pleas, his stony silence the final word on the matter. You can almost hear him muttering under his breath about proper burial rites and the importance of planning ahead. His boat is always full, always heavy with the silent, sorrowful shades of the dead. Yet, on rare occasions, the living would try to buy a ticket. The hero Aeneas, guided by the Sibyl, managed to secure passage by showing Charon a golden bow, a sort of divine VIP pass that even the grim ferryman had to respect. But when Heracles came calling, he apparently just bullied his way onto the boat, an act for which Charon was allegedly punished by Hades for a full year in chains. It's a tough gig when even your boss's relatives refuse to follow the rules. Charon is the ultimate gatekeeper, the first and most resonant symbol that in the underworld the rules are the rules, and your past life status means absolutely nothing without the proper paperwork, or, in this case, the proper pocket change. Once you've paid your fare and endured the world's most depressing boat ride, you arrive at the gates of Hades' realm. And who's there to greet you? The head of security, the underworld's very own guard dog, Cerberus. Now, calling Cerberus $1 a month is a bit of an understatement, like calling a hurricane a bit of a breeze. He is a monstrous, three-headed hound with a mane of writhing snakes, a serpent's tail, and a roar that could shake the very foundations of the earth. His job description was simple but critical: let everyone in, but let no one out. He is the living, barking, slavering embodiment of the finality of death. There is no escape. Despite his terrifying appearance, you have to admit he's remarkably good at his job. For the countless throngs of dead souls, he was a passive, if intimidating, presence. They were supposed to be there, so he'd let them drift on by. It was the living, the rule breakers, the tourists, the heroes on a divine side quest that were the problem. And for them, Cerberus was a truly formidable obstacle. He wasn't evil, just fiercely loyal and territorial. He was Hades' guard dog, and he took his duties very, very seriously. Yet, for a terrifying monster from the depths of hell, Cerberus had a couple of surprisingly mundane weaknesses. The first was music. When the legendary musician Orpheus traveled to the underworld to retrieve his wife, Eurydice, he didn't fight the beast. Instead, he played his lyre, and the beautiful, mournful melody lulled all three of Cerberus's heads to sleep, allowing Orpheus to slip past unharmed. It's a beautiful image, the power of art soothing the most savage of beasts. It also suggests that even hellhounds enjoy a good concert now and then. His other weakness, snacks. Like any dog, celestial or otherwise, Cerberus could be distracted by a tasty treat. Several heroes, including Aeneas, got past him by tossing him a honey cake, often one drugged with a sleeping potion. It's a wonderfully absurd image, a three-headed monster, the guardian of the abyss, being neutralized by the ancient equivalent of a sausage. It makes him seem a little less monstrous and a little more, well, dog-like. A very, very big dog who just wants a treat. Of course, we can't forget his most famous interaction with a hero, his brief and likely traumatic dognapping by Heracles. As his final labor, Heracles was tasked with bringing Cerberus to the surface world. He didn't use music or cakes to Heracles, being Heracles just wrestled the beast into submission. The poor dog, who had never seen the sun, was terrified, and Heracles eventually took pity on him and returned him to his post. You have to imagine Hades was furious. It's a massive security breach, a complete HR nightmare. Your top security asset was just manhandled and dragged out of the office by your over-muscled nephew. The paperwork must have been endless. Now, let's move from the frontline staff to upper management, and here we find the most complex and powerful figure in the entire realm, second only to Hades himself, Persephone, the queen of the underworld. Often painted as a tragic victim, a goddess of springtime flowers stolen away by the gloomy lord of the dead, her story is so much more than a simple abduction narrative. Reducing her to a damsel in distress does her a profound disservice. She is a figure of immense power, a dual deity who commands respect in two vastly different worlds. Yes, her journey to the underworld began in trauma. She was gathering flowers in a meadow when Hades burst forth from the earth and carried her away to be his bride. Her mother, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, was so distraught that she abandoned her duties, plunging the world into a barren, endless winter. This is where the story gets interesting. Zeus, faced with a world where nothing would grow and humanity was starving, was forced to intervene. He brokered a deal. Persephone could return to her mother, but only if she hadn't eaten any food in the underworld. But Hades, in a clever and arguably sneaky move, had offered her a pomegranate, and she had eaten a few seeds. This simple act bound her to the underworld forever. The compromise? Persephone would spend 2/3 of the year with her mother on Olympus, bringing spring and summer to the world. But for the remaining third, she would return to the underworld to rule by Hades' side as his queen, her descent coinciding with the barren months of autumn and winter. This story is more than a myth about the seasons. It's about Persephone's transformation. She isn't just a prisoner, she becomes a ruler. She is the perpetually exasperated, but ultimately competent co-CEO of the afterlife. In many myths, it's Persephone, not Hades, who interacts with mortal heroes who venture into their realm. She is the one who hears Orpheus's plea and is moved to allow him to take Eurydice back, albeit with a fatal condition. She shows a capacity for empathy and authority that Hades often lacks. He may be the king, the landlord of the dead, but she is its queen, a title she grows into and wields with a quiet, formidable power. She understands both the light and the dark, the world of the living and the realm of the dead. She's not just the girl who got kidnapped, she's the woman who learned to rule in hell. Of course, a kingdom of the dead needs more than a ferryman, a guard dog, and a royal couple. It needs a justice system. Enter the judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These weren't just any random spirits, they were once mortal kings, men so renowned for their wisdom, fairness, and unwavering commitment to justice in their own lifetimes that they were given the eternal, and frankly unenviable, job of judging every single soul that entered the underworld. Think of them as the most powerful, most incorruptible parole board in existence. They've seen and heard everything, and you cannot lie to them. Their courtroom is the final stop for every soul, where the entirety of a person's life is weighed and measured. Minos, the former king of Crete, was the chief justice, holding the deciding vote. Rhadamanthus, his brother, was in charge of judging the souls of those from Asia, while Aeacus, a former king of Aegina, judged the souls of Europeans. Together, they formed a tribunal that decided your eternal fate. Based on your deeds in life, they would direct you to one of three final destinations. The vast majority of souls, those who were neither particularly good nor particularly evil, were sent to the Asphodel Meadows, an eternity of aimless, tedious neutrality. It's the afterlife's equivalent of a grey, featureless waiting room. But for the truly wicked, the oathbreakers, the murderers, the people who defied the gods, the sentence was Tartarus, the deep abyss of eternal punishment. And for the rare few, the heroes and the exceptionally virtuous, the reward was Elysium, the blissful fields of paradise. This was the underworld's judiciary, dispensing a brand of justice that was absolute, inescapable, and eternal. Finally, no discussion of the underworld's staff would be complete without mentioning its most terrifying, most relentless enforcers, the Furies, also known as the Erinyes. These were not staff members who waited for you to arrive, they were the ones who might just drag you there themselves. Born from the blood of the castrated sky god Uranus, they were ancient, chthonic deities of vengeance, the living personification of a guilty conscience. They were described as horrifying creatures with snakes for hair, the wings of a bat, and eyes that wept tears of blood. Their purpose was singular and terrifying: to pursue and punish the most heinous of criminals, especially those guilty of patricide, matricide, or breaking a sacred blood-sworn oath. The Furies were the internal affairs division of the cosmos. They operated both in the mortal world and in the underworld, acting as agents of divine retribution. They were relentless, incorruptible, and utterly merciless. They would hound their victims across the earth, driving them to madness with their constant torment. They were the nagging, gnawing feeling of guilt given monstrous form, a psychological terror made real. Once you were on their list, there was no hiding. They were a reminder that some crimes were so offensive to the natural order of things that their punishment began long before you reached the final judgment of Minos and his court. They ensured that, for the truly guilty, hell was not just a destination, but a journey. Together, this strange, motley crew of ferrymen, monsters, queens, judges, and furies kept the gears of the afterlife turning. They weren't heroes or villains in the traditional sense. They were functionaries, each playing their necessary part in a system so vast and final it defied mortal comprehension. They proved that even in the land of the dead, there's a job to be done. It's just not a job you'd ever want to apply for. The Greek Underworld wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. There were no brochures, the Yelp reviews were terrible, and the only long-term residents were, well, permanent. Yet, despite the notoriously strict one-way door policy, a handful of mortals decided to treat the land of the dead like a vacation spot they just had to see. These weren't your average thrill-seekers. Getting a VIP pass to the pit required a special blend of divine parentage, earth-shattering grief, or a level of stupidity so profound it looped back around to bravery. This was the ultimate exclusive club, and the bouncer was a three-headed dog with a snake for a tail. So, who were these audacious souls who decided to pop down to Hades for a house call? Their stories are less about heroic conquests and more about a series of very questionable life choices, each one revealing just how the Greeks viewed the fragile, often blurry line between life and death. Buckle up, because we're about to follow the worst travel guides in mythological history. First up is Odysseus, the man for whom the term "it's complicated" was practically invented. He didn't venture into the underworld out of bravado. He went because his magically inclined situationship, the witch Circe, told him he needed to get directions from a dead guy. It was less a heroic descent and more the ancient world's most terrifying business trip. He doesn't storm the gates or fight his way in. His method is decidedly less glamorous. He digs a pit, slits the throats of a few sheep, and pours their blood into it. It's basically chumming the waters for ghosts, a grim supernatural bait-and-switch to lure the prophet Tiresias out for a chat. The experience is anything but triumphant. The first spirit he recognizes is his own mother, Anticlea. In a moment of raw, human grief, he tries to embrace her 3 times, and 3 times his arms pass right through her like smoke. It's a brutal, heartbreaking reminder of the absolute finality of this place. There are no reunions here, only echoes. After getting his prophetic directions from Tiresias, who, even in death, is still doling out cryptic advice, Odysseus hangs around for a bit of morbid networking. He chats with the ghost of Agamemnon, who spends his time complaining about his treacherous wife. It's a stark picture. The great king who led armies is now just another bitter shade with a story to tell. Then he sees Achilles, the greatest warrior of his generation, and Achilles is miserable. When Odysseus tries to console him, saying he's a king among the dead, Achilles delivers one of the most devastating lines in all of Greek literature. He says he'd rather be a living farmhand for a poor farmer than be the ruler of all the dead. Let that sink in. The ultimate hero, the man who chose glory and a short life, now realizes the absolute scam that was. All the fame, all the power, means nothing in this grey, joyless eternity. It's a powerful indictment of the entire heroic code, a confession that, in the end, life, any life, is better than this. Odysseus's visit isn't about conquering death, it's about being humbled by it. He gets the information he needs, and gets out of there as fast as he can, leaving the silent, whispering shades to their endless gloom. His journey is a pragmatic one, a stark lesson that the underworld is not a place for the living to linger. Now, if Odysseus was the reluctant tourist, Orpheus was the artist who thought he could change the world with a song. His story is perhaps the most famous, a tragedy fueled by a love so profound it was willing to challenge the fundamental laws of the universe. He wasn't looking for directions, he was demanding a refund. His wife, Eurydice, was killed by a viper on their wedding day. It's a tragedy of such cosmic cruelty that you can't help but feel the injustice. So Orpheus, the greatest musician to ever live, picks up his lyre and decides to do the unthinkable, walk into the heart of the underworld and bring her back. And here's the crazy part. It almost works. His music is so beautiful, so utterly heartbreaking, that it brings the entire underworld to a standstill. He charms the grumpy ferryman Charon, who gives him a free ride across the Styx. He plays a lullaby for Cerberus, and the fearsome hellhound curls up at his feet like a puppy. He walks through the fields of Asphodel, and the listless shades weep at the memory of the sun. He even reaches the foot of the throne of Hades and Persephone, and there he plays the song of his grief. He sings of his love, his loss, and his desperate, hopeless hope. The effect is astonishing. The music is so powerful that it halts the eternal punishments. Sisyphus sits down on his boulder to listen. Tantalus forgets his thirst. The Furies, the very embodiment of vengeance, are said to have wept for the first and only time. He literally moves hell itself. And Hades, the grim, unyielding CEO of the dead, is moved. Maybe it's Persephone, reminded of the vibrant world she lost, who convinces him. But for whatever reason, Hades agrees. He makes a deal. Eurydice can follow Orpheus back to the world of the living. But there's one condition, one tiny, little, soul-crushingly important rule. He must not look back at her until they are both fully in the sunlight. Imagine that walk. The slow, agonizing ascent from the crushing dark of the underworld. Orpheus can't hear her footsteps, shades make no sound. The silence behind him must have been deafening, a vacuum where his hope and his doubt waged a terrible war. Was she there? Was this a cruel trick? Every step is a test of faith. Every shadow feels like a lie. The path gets brighter, the exit is just ahead. He can feel the warmth of the sun on his skin. He steps out into the light, overjoyed, relieved. And in that moment of overwhelming emotion, in that desperate human need for confirmation, he turns around. He looks back. He sees her for just a fleeting second. She's there, right behind him, on the edge of the threshold. But as his gaze meets hers, she is pulled back into the darkness, like a dream dissolving at dawn. All he hears is a single, whispered word, "Farewell," and she is gone, forever. He failed at the last possible moment. It's a gut-wrenching, frustrating, and deeply human mistake. His grief, the very thing that powered his journey, was also the source of his doubt. His story became a cornerstone of the Orphic mystery cults, a tragic blueprint for trying to cheat death, a symbol of a love that could conquer hell but not human nature. Then there's Heracles. If Odysseus was the tourist and Orpheus was the artist, Heracles was the guy who decided that the best way to deal with the underworld security was to just kick the door down. No subtlety, no music, just pure, unadulterated demigod muscle. His final labor, the one designed to be impossible, was to go to hell and dognap the guard. His approach was characteristically direct. He didn't bother with bribes or pleas. He descended into the underworld and, in a surprising show of decorum, actually went to Hades and asked if he could borrow Cerberus for a bit. He was there to complete a job, not to start a war with the gods. Hades, likely taking one look at the most powerful man in the world standing in his throne room, agreed. But he had the same condition he gave Orpheus. A catch. Heracles had to subdue the three-headed hound of hell with his bare hands. No clubs, no arrows, no lion skin armor, just him and the beast. So Heracles finds Cerberus and proceeds to have what is possibly the most insane wrestling match in all of mythology. He gets the beast in a chokehold and just squeezes until the multi-headed monster dog submits. There's no trick, no divine intervention, just a man overpowering a monster from the pit of Tartarus. And picture the scene that follows. Heracles just slings this drooling, snarling, serpent-tailed dog over his shoulder and casually walks out of the underworld. He parades Cerberus before King Eurystheus, the man who gave him the labors, and the king is so terrified he jumps into a giant storage jar to hide. Then, like a responsible pet sitter, Heracles brings Cerberus right back to his post at the gates of hell, completely unharmed. Heracles' success is a testament to a different kind of power. He didn't persuade death or bargain with it, he simply overpowered its guardian. He treated the underworld not as a metaphysical reality, but as just another obstacle to be physically dominated. He succeeded where Orpheus failed, because his quest wasn't driven by a fragile human emotion like love, but by an indomitable, almost inhuman strength. But not every trip was a success. For every Heracles, there's a cautionary tale, and none is more pathetic than the story of Theseus and his best friend, Pirithous. These two were the hold my beer duo of ancient Greece, a pair of heroes whose egos were writing checks their bodies couldn't cash, their brilliant idea to kidnap Persephone. For no other reason than Pirithous, a mortal, decided he deserved to marry the Queen of the Dead. The sheer arrogance is breathtaking. They swagger into the underworld as if they own the place, ready to make off with the wife of the one god you absolutely do not mess with. Hades, however, is not a god given to fits of rage. He's more of a cold, calculating, cosmic irony kind of deity. He sees these two arrogant mortals and decides to teach them a lesson in hospitality. He greets them warmly, listens to their absurd proposal, and invites them to sit down and rest from their journey. They sit, and they cannot get up. Hades had offered them a seat on the hair of forgetfulness. They are magically bound to the rock, stuck in the underworld not as prisoners of war, but as eternal, pathetic fixtures. It's the mythological equivalent of being sent to time out for all eternity. They sat there for years, their memories slowly draining away, until Heracles stumbled upon them during his Cerberus napping adventure. He managed to yank Theseus free, though a good chunk of his backside was permanently left stuck to the chair, a wonderfully grim detail. But when he tried to free Pirithous, the entire underworld shook with tremors. Pirithous' crime, the instigator of this foolish quest, was too great. He was left behind. Their story is a stark warning about hubris. It demonstrates that there are lines you do not cross. You can visit the underworld, you can bargain, you can even fight its monsters. But you do not treat the divine realm as your personal playground. Some VIP passes are not meant to be punched. Finally, we have Psyche, perhaps the most unlikely visitor of them all. She wasn't a hero or a demigod, she was a mortal princess whose only crime was being so beautiful that she made the goddess of love, Aphrodite, jealous. As punishment, Aphrodite sends Psyche on a series of impossible tasks, the last of which is a trip to the underworld. Her quest sounds like something from a video game. Fetch a box of Persephone's beauty ointment. She's not there to rescue anyone or prove her strength. She's just a terrified young woman on a divine errand. Unlike the others, however, she gets a cheat sheet. A mysterious talking tower gives her step-by-step instructions on how to survive. The tower tells her to carry 2 coins in her mouth to pay Charon both ways, and to bring honey cakes to distract Cerberus. It warns her to refuse the hospitality of the dead, and most importantly, under no circumstances is she to open the box she retrieves from Persephone. It's a complete walkthrough for the underworld level. Psyche follows the instructions perfectly. She pays the ferryman, pacifies the dog, and politely declines a seat at Persephone's table. She gets the box, but on the way back, just like Orpheus and so many others, human nature kicks in. A moment of vanity, a flicker of curiosity, she thinks she could use a little divine beauty for herself. She opens the box. But the box doesn't contain a beauty cream. It contains a Stygian sleep, a deep, death-like coma. She collapses on the spot, another victim of the underworld's treacherous secrets. But her story has a different ending. Her lover, the god Eros, flies down and finds her. He awakens her, puts the sleep back in the box, and helps her complete her quest. She doesn't conquer death through strength or music, but is saved from it by love. These mortals, from the pragmatic Odysseus to the foolish Pirithous, all returned with a story. Their journeys mapped the psychological terrain of the Greek afterlife, exploring the human response to its terrifying finality. They are tales of grief, hubris, love, and sheer force of will, each one a testament to the ancient world's fascination with poking the one bear you should never, ever poke. For the Greeks, the biggest question wasn't just what happens after you die, but whether or not you could buy a round-trip ticket. So, you've navigated the rivers, bribed the ferryman, and avoided becoming puppy chow for a three-headed dog. You've arrived at the great sorting station of the afterlife, standing before the three judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. They've looked over your life's resume, checked your references, and now it's time to decide where you'll be spending, well, the rest of eternity. This isn't a simple heaven or hell binary choice, mind you. The Greek underworld had a more nuanced and, frankly, more bureaucratic system for eternal placement. It was a kind of cosmic curriculum where your final grade determined whether you'd be enrolled in advanced torture, remedial apathy, or the all-inclusive resort for the divinely favored. And for those who had lived lives of truly spectacular wickedness, for those who hadn't just broken the rules but had set them on fire and danced on the ashes, there was a special place. A place of profound and poetic suffering, the deepest, darkest, most dreaded region of the entire cosmos. Tartarus! Let's be clear, Tartarus isn't just the basement of the underworld, it's a cosmic oubliette. Hesiod described it as a great, stormy pit, so deep that if you dropped an anvil from the earth, it would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before hitting the bottom. It was as far below the underworld as the earth is below the heavens, a place of ultimate separation and punishment. This was the gods' supermax prison, reserved for the absolute worst of the worst. We're talking about the Titans, the original enemies of the Olympians, locked away after their cataclysmic war. But it was also the final destination for mortals whose hubris reached legendary proportions. The gods, it turns out, had a very, very long memory and an extremely dark sense of humor. The punishments here weren't just about pain, they were about poetic, psychological, soul-crushing irony. And our first inmate, our poster boy for eternal frustration, is the infamous Sisyphus. Now Sisyphus was the king of Corinth, and by all accounts, a master of trickery. He was the kind of guy who thought he could outsmart everyone, including the gods, which is generally a bad career move. His list of offenses was long. His most famous stunt was cheating death not once, but twice. First, when Thanatos, death himself, came to collect him, Sisyphus managed to chain him up. With death out of commission, nobody on Earth could die, which, as you can imagine, created a logistical nightmare and seriously annoyed Ares, the god of war, whose business model kind of depended on people dying. After Ares freed Thanatos and Sisyphus was finally taken to the underworld, he pulled his second trick. He had instructed his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites. Down in the gloom, he complained to Persephone that his wife was being disrespectful, and convinced her to let him go back to the surface for just a little while to sort it out. Of course, once he was back in the sun, he had no intention of returning. He lived to a ripe old age before the gods finally dragged him back, and this time, they were determined to make it stick. His punishment is one of the most famous images from all of Greek mythology. He was condemned to push a massive boulder up a steep hill, a task that required all his strength and focus. But every time, just as he was about to reach the very top, The immense weight would overcome him, and the boulder would roll all the way back down to the bottom, forcing him to start his labor all over again, forever. Think about the exquisite cruelty of this. It's not just hard labor, it's the definition of futility. It's the constant, agonizing proximity to a goal that is forever unattainable. The punishment was designed to perfectly mirror his crime. Just as he tried to cheat the natural cycle of life and death, he is now trapped in a cycle of meaningless, unending effort. It's the ultimate cosmic metaphor for the Monday morning feeling. Next, on our tour of divine retribution, we meet Tantalus, a name that has literally become synonymous with his punishment. Tantalus was another king, and even better, a son of Zeus. He was a favorite of the gods, often invited to dine with them on Mount Olympus, a VIP pass most mortals could only dream of. But familiarity, as they say, breeds contempt. And Tantalus decided, in an act of supreme arrogance and depravity, to test the gods' omniscience. He invited them to a banquet at his own palace, and for the main course, he chopped up his own son, Pelops, and served him to them in a stew. It was the ultimate party foul, a grotesque violation of every sacred law of hospitality and kinship. The gods, of course, were not fooled. All of them immediately recognized the horrific nature of the meal and recoiled in disgust, except for a distracted Demeter who, grieving for her lost daughter Persephone, accidentally nibbled on a piece of the shoulder. They reassembled Pelops, replacing the missing part with a piece of ivory, and then turned their attention to Tantalus. His punishment is a masterclass in ironic torture. He was placed in a pool of cool, clear water, but whenever he bent down to quench his agonizing thirst, the water would recede, leaving him gasping at the mud. Above his head hung the branches of a luscious fruit tree laden with ripe figs, pears, and pomegranates. But whenever he reached up to pluck a piece of fruit, a gust of wind would blow the branches just out of his grasp. He is eternally tormented by the proximity of the very things he needs to survive, forever tantalized. His punishment is a direct, cruel reflection of his crime. He who perverted the act of offering food and drink is now eternally denied them. It's a chilling reminder that for the Greek gods, justice wasn't just blind, it was creative, personal, and deeply, deeply malicious. And let's not forget the Danaids, the 50 daughters of King Danos. Their story is a tragedy of forced marriage and mass murder. Commanded by their father, 49 of them killed their husbands on their wedding night. Their punishment was another task of maddening futility. They were condemned to spend eternity trying to fill a bottomless bathtub with water carried in leaky jars or sieves. The water, like their hope, constantly drains away, a perpetual reminder of the lives they spilled and the futility of their violent act. And then there's Ixion, a man whose ambition was matched only by his audacity. After murdering his father-in-law, a crime so heinous that no mortal would purify him, Zeus himself took pity on him and brought him to Olympus. Ixion repaid this kindness by trying to assault Zeus's wife Hera. Zeus, ever the trickster, formed a cloud in Hera's image to test him. Ixion fell for the trap, and for this ultimate act of betrayal and hubris, he was bound to a winged fiery wheel, spinning for all eternity through the depths of Tartarus. It's a dizzying, terrifying image of divine justice at its most wrathful. These aren't just random punishments, they are carefully tailored psychological nightmares. They are eternal feedback loops of failure, designed to break the spirit for all time. Tartarus was a clear message from the gods. Your actions have consequences, and our creativity in designing those consequences is limitless. Don't test us. But what about the rest? What about the vast, silent majority of souls who weren't evil enough for Tartarus, but weren't heroic enough for paradise? For them, there was the Asphodel Meadows, and honestly, it might be the most depressing destination of all. This was the default afterlife for the average Joe of ancient Greece. It was a grey, spectral, and profoundly boring place. Here, the souls of the dead flitted about as witless shades, devoid of memory, personality, and purpose. They were like bats, squeaking and gibbering in the gloom, recognizing neither their loved ones nor their former selves. Achilles himself, when Odysseus meets him there in the Odyssey, famously says he'd rather be a poor farmer's servant on earth than be king of all the dead. That tells you everything you need to know. The Asphodel Meadows wasn't a punishment, it was an eternity of cosmic indifference. It was the afterlife equivalent of a dreary, endless waiting room where your name is never called. However, if you were a hero, a truly righteous person, or just happened to be related to a god, there was a much, much better option available. Welcome to Elysium, the VIP lounge of the underworld. Also known as the Elysian Fields, this was the ancient Greek equivalent of paradise. Getting in was tough. You generally had to be a demigod like Heracles, a hero of a great war like Menelaus, or someone deemed exceptionally virtuous by the judges. This was the ultimate gated community, and the amenities were fantastic. Homer describes it as a place where life is easiest for men. No snow, no heavy storm, no rain, but ever the ocean sends up blasts of the shrill blowing west wind to refresh men. It was a land of perpetual spring, where the residents, called the Elysianites, enjoyed a blissful and carefree existence, engaging in their favorite pastimes, whether that be sports, music, or philosophy. It was the perfect retirement forever. Interestingly, some later traditions, likely influenced by mystery cults like Orphism, added a fascinating wrinkle to the Elysian experience, the possibility of rebirth. After 1,000 years of chilling in paradise, souls could choose to drink from the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and be reincarnated back on Earth for another go-round. This introduced a concept of cyclical existence, a chance to improve one's cosmic standing. And if a soul was virtuous enough to earn a spot in Elysium 3 times, they were granted the ultimate upgrade. They were sent to the Isles of the Blessed, an even more exclusive paradise within paradise, a permanent home where they could live in eternal bliss with the heroes of old. This was the platinum tier afterlife. So, when you lay it all out, the Greek Underworld reveals a surprisingly detailed, if terrifying, system of justice. You have the horrific, tailor-made punishments of Tartarus for the wicked, the blissful, eternal holiday of Elysium for the heroic, and the vast, grey, indifferent plains of Asphodel for everyone else. This tiered system tells us so much about ancient Greek values. Hubris, the act of thinking you were equal to or better than the gods, was the ultimate sin, punished with the most creative cruelty imaginable. On the other hand, heroism, piety, and virtue were the tickets to paradise, though having a god in the family certainly helped you skip the line. It's a moral landscape written in the language of eternal consequences. The justice of the Greek underworld wasn't swift or simple, it was poetic, psychological, and designed to last forever. It was a divine curriculum of consequences, and the final exam was a real killer. So, for centuries, the Greek underworld had a pretty stable business model. You die, you get on the boat, you cross the river, and you settle into a long, monotonous eternity as a slightly transparent version of your former self. Simple, predictable, and frankly, a little unimaginative. It was the beige cubicle farm of afterlives. But then, a new group of people arrived on the scene, looked at the established blueprint for eternity, and said, "Yeah, we can do better." These were the philosophers and the mystics, the ancient world's equivalent of disruptive startup founders, ready to pivot the entire concept of death. They weren't content with a one-size-fits-all gloomfest. They started asking inconvenient questions. What if the soul was more than just a faded memory? What if death wasn't an end, but a transition? What if the underworld wasn't a physical address, but a state of being? It was the beginning of the underworld's conceptual art phase, and things were about to get weird, profound, and a whole lot more complicated. Leading the charge, as he so often did, was Plato. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a world builder, a storyteller. He took the dusty old myths and gave them a fresh coat of metaphysical paint, turning the underworld from a dreary depot into a cosmic sorting facility with a focus on moral education. His masterwork in this department is the myth of tucked away at the end of his dialogue, The Republic. It's basically the mother of all near-death experience stories, and it completely revolutionized the Western concept of the afterlife. It's less a myth and more of a detailed, philosophical travelogue from the great beyond. The story follows a soldier named who dies in battle, but, plot twist, doesn't actually stay dead. He's sent back to his body 12 days later with a mission, put to tell the living what's really going on over on the other side. He's the original afterlife influencer, sent back with a full report on the celestial machinery of justice. According to the soul arrives at this incredible, otherworldly place with 2 openings into the heavens and 2 into the earth. Judges sit and pass sentence, sending the just upwards for 1,000 years of bliss and the unjust downwards for 1,000 years of punishment. It's the classic model, but with a fixed term limit. No eternal damnation just yet. This is more like a spiritual prison sentence followed by parole. After their 1,000-year stint in either the celestial resort or the subterranean correctional facility, the souls all gather in a meadow. Here, they share stories. The ones from above talk about unimaginable beauty, while the ones from below are dirty, haggard, and weeping as they recount the horrors they've seen and suffered. It's like a deeply traumatic school reunion. But here is where Plato drops his biggest bombshell, the idea that would echo for millennia, reincarnation. This isn't the end of the road, it's just a pit stop before you have to clock in for another life on Earth. The underworld is no longer a final destination, it's a celestial department of motor vehicles where you have to pick your next ride. The souls are led to the throne of the fates, surrounded by the spindle of necessity, a giant cosmic gyroscope that spins the universe. A celestial prophet lays out lots of life patterns on the ground, lives of tyrants, animals, artists, athletes, ordinary citizens. Every possible career path, every possible personality, all laid out like brochures for a very, very long holiday. And then comes the crucial part. The souls have to their next life. This is a radical departure from the old model. Suddenly, you have agency. Your next life is your responsibility. The prophet explicitly says, "The blame belongs to the one who chooses the god is blameless." No more blaming Zeus for your bad luck. You picked this life, buddy. Plato describes the scene with a mix of pity and fascination. He notes how a soul that had been a hero like Orpheus, disgusted with humanity, chooses to be reborn as a swan. A soul who was once a great warrior, Ajax, chooses the quiet life of a lion, wanting to avoid the drama of human politics. It's a cosmic career day, and the choices are often driven by the baggage of the previous life. The most poignant choice is that of Odysseus, the wise, long-suffering hero who has had his fill of adventure and glory, searches high and low for the one life nobody wants. The life of a simple, private man with no great responsibilities. He finds it discarded in a corner and joyfully proclaims it's the one he would have chosen anyway. After all that chaos, all he wants is peace. Once the choice is made, the souls are given a drink from the river of Lethe, the river of unmindfulness or forgetfulness. This wipes their memory clean, ensuring they don't start their new life with all the spoilers. They are then whisked away, born again, with no memory of the majestic system they just participated in. Except for Air, of course, who was conveniently excused from taking a sip. Or Plato's myth transformed the underworld from a place of passive endurance into a dynamic cycle of learning, consequence, and rebirth. It became a moral landscape, a place where your actions had cosmic weight and your choices shaped your very existence. It was a powerful, compelling vision, and it laid the groundwork for countless philosophical and religious systems to come. But Plato wasn't the only one workshopping new afterlife concepts. While he was drafting his philosophical epics, more secretive, hands-on movements were gaining traction. These were the mystery cults, and they offered not just a theory about the afterlife, but a guaranteed ticket to a better one. First among these were the Orphics. Taking their inspiration from the ultimate underworld tourist, Orpheus, they developed a whole theology based on his supposed teachings and sacred texts. If Plato was writing the academic paper, the Orphics were running the intensive, multi-level marketing seminar on soul salvation. Orphism introduced a radical new idea about human nature. They believed humans had a dual soul, a sinful, earthly component inherited from the Titans, who had, in their mythology, dismembered and eaten the god Dionysus. But, since Zeus zapped the Titans with a thunderbolt and humans sprang from their ashes, we also contained a tiny divine spark of the consumed Dionysus. So, according to the Orphics, life on Earth was a punishment. The body was a prison, a tomb for this divine spark of a soul. The goal wasn't to have a good time on Earth, but to purify yourself and escape the ungrievous cycle earth of reincarnation. It was a deeply pessimistic view of mortal life, but a very optimistic one about the soul's potential. To achieve this escape, you had to live an ascetic life, no meat, no eggs, no beans for some reason, and be initiated into the Orphic mysteries. You had to learn the secret knowledge, the passwords that would get you past the guardians of the underworld. Archaeology has even turned up thin gold tablets buried with initiates, acting as a cheat sheet for the newly deceased. These tablets give specific instructions for the soul's journey. You will find a cypress tree to your left, one says. Do not go near this spring. You will find another, cool water flowing from the lake of memory. The guardians will ask you who you are. Tell them, I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. It's a script for the most important audition of your existence. If you did everything right, your soul wouldn't just get a pass to Elysium, it would achieve a kind of apotheosis, a reunion with the divine. The Orphics weren't just trying to get a reservation in a nice neighborhood of the underworld, they were trying to check out of the hotel entirely and merge with the management. Then there were the Eleusinian mysteries, perhaps the most famous and respected of all the secret cults. Based in the town of Eleusis near Athens, these rites were dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and her daughter Persephone. For nearly 2,000 years, they were the spiritual heart of the Greek world. Unlike the exclusive Orphics, the Eleusinian mysteries were open to pretty much anyone, men, women, slaves, foreigners, as long as you spoke Greek and hadn't committed murder. But the rites themselves were shrouded in absolute secrecy. To reveal what happened during the initiation was a capital offense, and they were remarkably good at keeping secrets. We still don't know the full details. What we do know is that the initiation centered on reenacting the story of Demeter's desperate search for Persephone after she was abducted by Hades. The initiates, or Mistai, would walk a sacred pilgrimage from Athens to Eleusis fast, and then enter a great hall called the Telesterion. There, over the course of a night, they experienced something. It was a multi-sensory experience. There was darkness, then blinding light. There were dramatic pageants, sacred objects were revealed, and words were spoken. It's widely believed they drank a psychoactive barley and mint potion called the Kikun, which likely helped heighten the spiritual intensity of the experience. It wasn't just a story they heard, it was a vision they lived. The promise of Eleusis wasn't a detailed map of the afterlife or a get-out-of-jail-free card like the Orphics offered. The promise was more subtle, more psychological. The Homeric hymn to Demeter says that whoever undergoes the rites will have a blessed lot after death, while the uninitiated will just have a murky gloom. The experience of witnessing Persephone's return from the underworld, mirroring the cycle of seeds sprouting from the earth, seems to have given initiates a profound sense of hope. It didn't eliminate death, but it took away the fear of death. It transformed it from a terrifying finality into a natural, necessary part of a grander cycle. It promised that, like Persephone, there was a return to the light. While the mystics focused on spiritual experience, other philosophical schools continued to deconstruct the afterlife intellectually. The Stoics, for example, were the great pragmatists of the ancient world. They believed the universe was a single, divine being, a rational entity they sometimes called God, Zeus, or Klogos. For the Stoics, individual souls were just sparks from this great cosmic fire. At death, your soul simply returned to the source, reabsorbed into the universal reason from whence it came. There was no personal survival, no memory, no reward or punishment. Death was simply a natural process of dissolution, a return to the whole. It was neither good nor bad, it was just part of the plan. And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you had the Epicureans. If the Orphics were selling eternal salvation, the Epicureans were the party poopers who told you the entire supernatural framework was a delusion. They were materialists believing that everything, including the soul, was made of atoms. For Epicurus, death was the ultimate nothing. When you die, the atoms of your body and soul simply disperse. There is no consciousness, no sensation, no judge, no ferryman, no underworld, nothing. It ceases to exist. His famous line on the matter is simple: death is nothing to us. For when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we do not exist. This wasn't meant to be depressing, it was meant to be liberating. If there's nothing after death, there's nothing to fear. All those anxieties about eternal punishment in Tartarus, gone. You were free to pursue the goal of life, which for Epicurus was a modest, tranquil pleasure, free from pain and anxiety. Don't worry about angry gods or post-mortem judgment, just be a good person, enjoy your friends, and live a quiet life. So, In the span of a few centuries, the Greek concept of the afterlife went through a mind-bending transformation. It fractured. The single, state-sponsored vision of a gloomy, subterranean realm was challenged, reimagined, and picked apart from every possible angle. It became a philosophical battleground. Was the underworld a place of eternal consequence, as the poets claimed? Was it a cosmic re-education center, as Plato proposed? A spiritual prison to escape from, as the Orphics preached? Or was it simply a metaphor for a psychological state, a fear to be overcome through initiation or rational thought? Was it, as the Epicureans argued, just not a thing at all? The underworld was no longer just a place on a mythological map. It had become a symbol, a vast intellectual and spiritual landscape where the Greeks explored their deepest questions about morality, justice, and the nature of the human soul. The old realm of Hades hadn't vanished, but it was now crowded with new ideas, each jostling for position, turning the land of the dead into the liveliest place in Greek thought. The literal geography of Tartarus and Elysium was slowly being replaced by the conceptual architecture of the mind. The conversation had shifted from, what happens when we die, to, what does it mean to be alive? And in doing so, the philosophers and mystics ensured that the underworld, in all its forms, would remain endlessly, eternally fascinating. They gave it an afterlife of its own. It was the ultimate renovation project. They took Hades's dark, drafty old mansion and turned it into a combination courthouse, recycling plant, spiritual retreat, and, for some, a vacant lot. The underworld had officially entered its modern era, and it was far more complex and contradictory than any of its early residents could have ever imagined. So, here we are, at the end of our tour through the classical gloom. You'd think that once the temples crumbled and the pantheon was officially retired, the underworld would have just faded to black. But that's the funny thing about good stories, and especially good horror stories, they don't die. They just haunt new houses. The Greek underworld is perhaps the most successful ghost in history. It's a concept from a dead religion that has refused to shuffle off this mortal coil. Instead, it has spent the last 2 millennia leaking into everything, its core ideas permeating our religions, our art, and our entertainment like a persistent pomegranate-scented stain. Its most significant and, let's be honest, most world-altering influence has been on Christianity. It's a sensitive subject, but the architectural and conceptual borrowing is impossible to ignore. The early writers and thinkers of Christianity were, after all, living in a world thoroughly marinated in Greek culture. When they needed to describe the mechanics of the afterlife, they didn't start from scratch, they reached for the blueprints they already knew. The very word Hades was co-opted. In the Greek New Testament, Hades is used to refer to the realm of the dead, a holding place, much like its original Greek meaning. But over time, as the theology of eternal punishment crystallized, the name became tangled up with the more fearsome concept of hell, or Gehenna, the place of fiery, eternal torment. The brand name was just too good to pass up. And speaking of fiery torment, let's talk about Tartarus, that deep, dark pit where the Greeks threw titans and legendary sinners like Sisyphus wasn't just forgotten. It became the foundational model for the Christian hell. The idea of a specific, subterranean location designed exclusively for eternal punishment wasn't a universal concept, it was a Greek one, and it was adopted with gusto. The geography of damnation has a clear and direct ancestry. Think about the process. The Greeks imagined a post-mortem evaluation, where judges like Minos and Rhadamanthus would assess your life and sort you into the correct neighborhood. This framework of a final judgment, of being weighed and measured and sent to your just reward or punishment, became a cornerstone of Abrahamic eschatology. It's the same divine administrative process, just with a new CEO. Even the iconography has echoes. While the Greek Hades was more of a grim, aloof king than a purely evil figure, his image as the dark ruler of a subterranean realm holding dominion over souls provided a visual and narrative template. Later depictions of Satan as the king of hell, enthroned in a dark kingdom, owe more than a little to the long shadow cast by the Lord of the Dead. It was less a hostile takeover and more of a merger, creating a new, more terrifying entity for a new age. Before Christianity fully codified its vision, however, The Romans had already performed the most direct copy-paste in mythological history. When Rome assimilated Greece, it took the gods, the myths, and the entire afterlife lock, stock, and smoking chthonic altar. Hades became Pluto, a name that emphasized his dominion over the wealth of the earth. Persephone became Proserpina, her story of abduction and seasonal return reenacted under a new banner. But the core product remained the same. The river Styx still flowed, Charon still demanded his toll, and Cerberus still guarded the gate. The Romans were brilliant engineers and administrators not just of empires, but of culture. They saw the Greek underworld, recognized its powerful narrative machinery, and integrated it seamlessly into their own system. It was the same grim package, just with new Latin branding. Yet, the most spectacular and detailed renovation of the Greek floor plan wouldn't come from a theologian or a conquering empire, but from a poet. In the 14th century, Dante Alighieri picked up the classical blueprints, rolled them out on his desk, and proceeded to build a skyscraper of suffering that would redefine the Western imagination of hell forever. His Inferno is a direct and loving homage to its Greek predecessor. Dante doesn't just borrow, he explicitly acknowledges his sources. His guide through the 9 circles of hell is Virgil, the Roman poet whose hero, Aeneas, took his own tour of the underworld. It's a profound nod, a poet tipping his hat to his master, admitting that to understand this place, you have to talk to the people who imagined it first. Virgil is Dante's key to the ancient kingdom. And what a kingdom it is! The geography of Dante's hell is the Greek underworld on steroids, organized with a terrifying bureaucratic precision. The journey begins by crossing the Acheron, with the ferryman Charon, a grumpy, fiery-eyed demon who is lifted directly from the pages of Greek myth. Dante's Charon is more demonic, more explicitly part of a system of punishment, but he's still the same guy doing the same miserable job. The gate is guarded not by a dog, but by the same 3-headed hound, Cerberus, who now ravenously tears at the souls of the gluttonous. Minos, the wise Cretan king and judge of the dead, is also there, transformed into a grotesque beast who wraps his tail around the damned to assign them to their proper circle. Dante saw the Greek staff and decided they were perfect for middle management in his new, expanded enterprise. This system of punishment, the contrapasso, where the sin is ironically mirrored in the eternal torment, is a perfected version of the Greek model. Sisyphus, Tantalus, and the Danaids were the prototypes. Dante took this principle of poetic justice and applied it to every conceivable human failing, creating a complex moral taxonomy of suffering that was both a theological statement and a dark, literary masterpiece. The Finfanu is the ultimate testament to the underworld's adaptability. Flash forward through the centuries, and the underworld's DNA is so deeply embedded in our culture that we often don't even recognize it. It has become the default setting for any story that wants to peek behind the final curtain. It's there in our movies, our books, and most vividly, in our video games. You can't talk about the modern underworld without talking about Disney's Hercules-esque. James Woods' portrayal of Hades as a fast-talking, sarcastic, hot-headed Hollywood agent is, of course, wildly inaccurate to the myth. But it was brilliant. It cemented a persona for the god of the dead in the popular consciousness that has lasted for decades, not a grim king, but a frustrated, scheming CEO who just can't get a break. Then you have the Percy Jackson series, which modernized the entire pantheon. Its underworld is a masterclass in adaptation. The entrance is through a recording studio in Los Angeles, because of course it is. Charon is a bitter, underpaid ferryman in a slick Italian suit, complaining about the souls never having the proper fare. It's the ancient myth filtered through the lens of modern bureaucracy and ennui. The video games, however, have provided the most immersive tours. The first of War series repeatedly throws its hero, Kratos, into the realm of Hades, depicting it as a brutal, terrifying landscape of souls, chains, and monstrous beasts. It's the Tartarus aspect of the myth turned up to 11, a visceral, interactive nightmare that feels ancient and epic. It is a place of punishment, pure and simple. And then there is Hades, the video game that did for the underworld what Hamilton did for the Founding Fathers. It took the entire cast of characters, Hades, Persephone, Zagreus, Achilles, Charon, Cerberus, the Furies, and gave them nuance, wit, and deeply compelling personalities. It presented the underworld not as a place of misery, but as a dysfunctional family home and a sprawling, labyrinthine workplace. The The first hards captured the spirit of the myths perfectly, understanding that these weren't just archetypes but characters. It made you care about the ferryman, the guard dog, and the perpetually exhausted god of the dead, trying to manage it all. It single-handedly revitalized interest in the source material, proving that these ancient stories are still brimming with life, ironically enough. Beyond specific retellings, the core themes of the Greek underworld have become fundamental to our storytelling. The katabasis, the hero's journey into the land of the dead, is one of the most powerful narrative archetypes we have. It's the story of confronting the ultimate fear, facing one's own mortality and inner darkness, and returning with profound knowledge. It's Luke Skywalker in the cave on Dagobah. It's Neo meeting the architect. It's every detective entering the criminal underworld to find the truth. We are also still captivated by the idea of cosmic justice. The neat division of the underworld into places of punishment, mediocrity, and reward, Astfadel and Elysium, satisfies a deep human craving for a world where actions have clear and direct consequences. We want to believe that in the end, there's a reckoning, that the scales are balanced. The Greek underworld provided the first, most compelling model of how that might work. It also gave us a way to manage the unmanageable. By personifying death, by giving it a king, a ferryman, a guard dog, and an address, the Greeks made the great, terrifying unknown into something comprehensible. It became a system, a bureaucracy, and if there's one thing humans know how to deal with, it's bureaucracy. The modern figure of the Grim Reaper, a robed figure who comes to collect you, is a direct descendant of Thanatos and Charon, a functionary of the inevitable. In the end, the Greek underworld has survived for a simple reason. It's a damn good story. It's a story about everything that matters: life, death, love, loss, justice, and the desperate, perhaps foolish, hope that there's something more on the other side of the river. It provides a language and a landscape to explore our most profound anxieties and our most enduring questions. The names have changed, the management has been restructured, and the punishments have been updated for new and creative sins, but the foundation remains. The Greek underworld is the first draft of the afterlife, a draft so powerful, so resonant, and so deeply ingrained in our imagination that we've been revising, rebooting, and ripping it off for 3,000 years. And it seems we have no intention of stopping. After all, a good gloomy afterlife is timeless. So, here we are, at the end of the road, standing at the gates of our own conclusion. We've taken a long, strange trip through the ever-shifting landscapes of the Greek underworld, from its earliest, saupiest form to its final, philosophically dense iteration. We started in the murky, depressing gloom of the Homeric afterlife, a place so devoid of personality that its main selling point was, well, that it wasn't much of anything. It was the universe's most poorly lit waiting room, where every soul, hero or zero, was reduced to a witless, squeaking shadow. Fun times. Then, we saw the realm get a much-needed, if not exactly desired, CEO. Hades, the cosmic middle manager, stepped in, and the underworld began to take on a structure that felt hauntingly familiar. It became a kingdom, a bureaucracy, a place with rules, regions, and a rigid, if grim, sense of order. We charted its geography, a travel brochure from hell, literally. We navigated the 5 rivers, from the river of unbreakable oaths to the river of pure, unadulterated hatred. We saw the 3-headed dog, the grumpy ferryman, and the queen who split her time between death and flowers, a compromise that has fueled family therapy sessions for millennia. We even peeked into the VIP section, watching heroes like Heracles, Odysseus, and Orpheus take the death-daring day trip downstairs. They went seeking wisdom, loved ones, or just to complete a ridiculously difficult to-do list, and in doing so, they mapped the terrors and wonders for the rest of us. And, of course, we've stared into the abyss of Tartarus, where divine justice revealed its truly bizarre, darkly ironic sense of humor. We saw a man forced to push a rock forever, and another cursed with eternal hunger and thirst. It was a curriculum of consequences designed to be both a deterrent and, let's be honest, a source of grim entertainment for the gods. So after all that, after the gloom, the bureaucracy, the monsters, and the endless, pointless punishments, we have to ask the big question: so what? Why, in the 21st century, are we still so utterly captivated by this ancient, subterranean soap opera? Is it just because the stories are cool? I mean, they are. They're filled with drama, action, and pathos. But it runs deeper than that. The Greek Underworld isn't just a story, it's one of the most elaborate, imaginative, and influential answers to the single most universal human question: what happens when we die? And the answer the Greeks came up with is, frankly, brilliant. It's not a simple heaven or hell, it's a complex, multi-layered system that reflects the complexities of life itself. It's a cosmic bureaucracy, a divine legal system, and a deeply personal psychological journey all rolled into one. The true genius of the underworld is that it was never really about the dead. It was always, and has always been, about the living. It was a mirror held up to Greek society, reflecting their values, their fears, their obsession with order, and their understanding of justice. Think about it. The development of a clear hierarchy: Hades as king, Persephone as queen, the judges, the Furies, mirrors the Greeks' own experiments with law, order, and city-states. They were creating organized societies on Earth, so it only made sense that the afterlife would have a similar org chart. It's cosmic urban planning. The punishments of Tartarus, they aren't just random tortures, they are exquisitely tailored psychological nightmares that reflect the crimes of the sinners. Tantalus, who abused his privilege of dining with the gods, is surrounded by food and drink he can never have. Sisyphus, whose cleverness defied the gods, is given a task that is both mindless and eternal, a total negation of his defining trait. This isn't just about punishment, it's about a deep, philosophical belief in cosmic balance. Every action has an equal and opposite, and often deeply ironic, reaction. It's a concept of justice that is both terrifying and, in a strange way, deeply satisfying to our narrative-hungry brains. We want the punishment to fit the crime, and the Greeks delivered that in spades. Even Elysium, the paradise for heroes, tells us what the Greeks valued most. It wasn't a place of ethereal, abstract bliss. It was a sunlit field where you could continue doing the things you loved in life: athletics, music, conversation. It was the idealized retirement of a warrior poet, a continuation of a life well lived, not an escape from it. But the underworld's staying power isn't just in its societal reflection, it's in its profound understanding of the human heart. The stories that resonate the most are the ones that are achingly human. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice isn't just about a guy with a magic harp, it's about the gut-wrenching grief of loss and the desperate, irrational hope that we could somehow reverse it. His fateful glance backward is one of the most tragic and relatable moments in all of mythology. It's a testament to doubt, to fear, to the simple, heartbreaking impossibility of following the one rule that matters most. It's a story about how love can lead us into the darkest places, and how our own human weakness can keep us there. Then there's Persephone. She's not just a victim of abduction. Over time, she evolved into a powerful, dual-natured deity who commanded respect. She embodies the cycles of nature, yes, but also the complexity of the human spirit. She is both the bringer of spring and the queen of the dead, a figure of life and sorrow, demonstrating that joy and grief are often two sides of the same coin. And what about Hades himself? We've painted him as a reluctant CEO, and that's part of his modern appeal. He's not a devil, not a figure of pure evil. He's a bureaucrat, a grim, solitary god who was handed a job nobody wanted and decided to do it with quiet, solemn efficiency. He's the ultimate stoic, maintaining order in a realm of chaos, and his story is a quiet reminder that not all power is glorious. Sometimes it's just a job. These figures are more than just names in an old book. They are archetypes. They are the bedrock of characters we still see today. The tormented artist, the reluctant ruler, the hero descending into darkness to find themselves, it all has roots in these ancient tales. The underworld provided a psychological toolkit that storytellers have been raiding for centuries. This is where the philosophers really had a field day. Thinkers like Plato saw the underworld not just as a physical place, but as a perfect allegory for the journey of the soul. In his Myth of Ur, the afterlife becomes a vast system of reincarnation and moral education. It's a place where souls are judged, purified, and choose their next life, learning cosmic truths along the way. Suddenly, the underworld wasn't just a destination, it was a process. It was a metaphor for self-reflection, for understanding the consequences of our actions, not in a literal pit of fire, but in the fabric of our very being. The journey down became a journey inward. This reframing is crucial. It turned a mythological map into a philosophical one. The rivers weren't just bodies of water, they were psychological states. Crossing the Styx was committing to a change. Drinking from the Lethe was the blissful, tempting release of forgetting your past traumas. Choosing the waters of Mnemosyne was the harder path, holding onto your identity, your memories, your true self, with all the pain and joy that entails. That choice between forgetting and remembering is perhaps one of the most profound ideas to come out of the entire mythology. Is true peace found in blissful ignorance, or is a life, with all its burdens, worth remembering? The mystery cults that promised their initiates a secret path through the afterlife were banking on the latter. They were selling not just a better death, but a better preserved identity. And this is why we are still obsessed. The Greek Underworld is the ultimate world-building exercise. It's a system so detailed, so psychologically resonant, and so narratively flexible that it can be anything we want it to be. It can be a literal place of dread, a source of thrilling adventure stories, or a deep well of philosophical metaphor. It has seeped into the very foundations of Western culture. Dante's Inferno is essentially a heavily Christianized fan fiction sequel to Virgil's Aeneid. Modern fantasy, from video games to novels, is replete with underworld levels, river crossings, and grim ferrymen. We talk about Sisyphean tasks and tantalizing goals without even thinking about their dark origins. So, in the end, our enduring fascination with the Greek underworld isn't really about a fear of death. If it were, we'd have stuck with the boring, murky version from Homer. No, it's not fear. It's morbid curiosity wrapped in a deep appreciation for a well-told story and a well-designed system. We love to understand how things work, and the underworld is a fantastically complex machine. It's a machine for processing souls, for dispensing justice, and for explaining the unexplainable. It's a story that assures us that even in the face of the ultimate void, there is structure, there is narrative, there are rules. The ancient Greeks looked into the terrifying, silent abyss of what comes next, and instead of turning away, they populated it. They gave it a geography, a government, and a cast of characters more enduring than most living celebrities. They took the ultimate unknown and made it, if not less scary, then at least a whole lot more interesting. And for all our scientific advancement and sophisticated philosophy, we're still just as clueless as they were about what really happens when the lights go out. The only difference is, they wrote a better story about it. A story that reminds us that even in the deepest, darkest gloom, there's a strange and enduring glory to be found in the tales we tell ourselves about the end. So, there you have it. The Greek underworld, from its murky, joyless beginnings to its complex, bureaucratic evolution. It's a place that reflects our deepest fears and our most profound questions about life, death, and what might come after. It's a realm that has inspired countless stories, from the ancient epics to modern films and books. And while it may not be the paradise we dream of, or the hell we fear, it's a fascinating glimpse into how the Greeks understood the end of life and what might lie beyond. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the underworld. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the Greek underworld? Do you have a favorite myth or story from this realm? Let's keep the conversation going.